Hello, this is Uday. In this video, we are going to discuss about Azure Storage Primary Redundancy. Through this video, we are going to understand what is the Azure Storage Redundancy and redundancy in the primary region. So let's try to understand what is the Azure Storage Redundancy first. Azure Storage always stores multiple copies of your data so that it's protected from planned and unplanned events that includes transient hardware failures, network or power outages, and massive natural disasters. Redundancy ensures that your storage account meets its availability and durability targets even in the face of failures. So Azure Storage Redundancy provides primary and secondary type of redundancies. So let's try to understand what is redundancy in the primary region. So data in the Azure Storage account is always replicated 3 times in the primary region. So there would be 3 multiple copies of your data when you are trying to store your data in the primary region. And within the primary region, Azure Storage offers 2 options for how your data is being replicated. Let's try to understand the options. So one is locally redundant storage option. So local redundant storage copies your data synchronously 3 times within a single physical location in the primary region. Locally redundant storage is the least expensive replication option, but it is not recommended for applications requiring high availability or durability, as local redundant storage is the lowest cost redundancy option and offers the least durability compared to other options. Local redundant storage protects your data against server rack and driver failures. However, if a disaster such as fire or flooding occurs within the data center, all replicas of a storage account using LRS may be lost or unrecoverable. So it is recommended you can opt for LRS or local redundant storage when you can easily recover the data or recreate the data that is being stored under the primary region through local redundant storage. Through this image, we can see how the data is being stored into the local redundant storage services through the primary region. A write request to a storage account that is using LRS happens synchronously. The write operation returns successfully only after the data is written in all 3 replicas. Now let's try to see when to choose the local redundant storage. If your application stores data that can be easily reconstructed if the data loss occurs, you may opt for locally redundant storage. In some cases, the paid regions across which the data is geo-replicated may be in another country or region. In such scenarios, we can use the local redundant storage services. If your scenario is using Azure unmanaged disk, you may opt for LRS. However, we also know that unmanaged disk can be handled through GRS option, but it is not recommended due to potential issues with consistency over asynchronous geo-replications. Now let's look at the second option for redundancy in the primary region, that is zone redundant storage, which copies your data synchronously across the Azure availability zones in the primary region. For applications requiring high availability, Microsoft recommends using zone redundant storage in the primary region and also replicating to a secondary region. Microsoft recommends using ZRS in the primary region for Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2 workloads. As we have seen through our previous video, that Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2 are used to store the data and perform analytics using Hadoop and other analytic engines through Microsoft Azure services. Each availability zone is a separate physical location with independent power, cooling, and networking. With zone redundant storage, your data is still accessible for both read and write operations even if a zone becomes unavailable. Like as we have seen for LRS, that is local redundant storage, if there is a hardware failure like catching a fire or disaster floods, the data center becomes unavailable and data might be lost. It is not the case with zone redundant storage, whereas if the zone becomes unavailable, you can still access your data for both read and write operations. If a zone becomes available, Azure undertakes networking updates such as DNS repointing. Microsoft recommends using zone redundant storage in the primary region for scenarios that are requiring high availability. Zone redundant storage is also recommended for restricting up replications of data to a particular country or region to meet data governance requirements. Through this image, we can see that multiple copies of the data is being stored at different centers which are available at different zones throughout the primary region. Whereas in the local redundant storage, what we see was a single data center where the copies of data is being stored. However, in the local redundant storage, multiple copies of data is being stored at single data center at same availability zone in the primary region. Now let's try to understand when to choose the zone redundant storage services. Zone redundant storage provides excellent performance, low latency, and resilience for your data if it becomes temporarily unavailable. For protection against regional disasters, Microsoft recommends using Geo Zone Redundant Storage, which uses ZRS in the primary region and geo replicates your data to a secondary region. ZRS is supported for all Azure storage services through standard general purpose V2 storage accounts that includes Azure Blob Storage, Azure File Storage, Azure Table Storage, and Azure Queue Storage. So this is the high-level overview of Azure Storage on the primary redundancy. I hope the video is helpful to you. If you like the video, please hit the like button. And if you are new to the channel, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so that you can get the latest notifications as soon as we have uploaded any new video. Thank you.